Welcome to your course, Trifecta for Change, How to Be a Top Personal Trainer. My name is Jackie Crockford. Thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation. Joining us today is our presenter, Anthony Wall. Anthony, come on out.
Hi Jackie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Hey everybody.
Good, ready to get started today. It's very exciting.
Yep.
So Anthony, you are an employee of ACE. You came all the way from upstairs today to give this presentation in our studio. And today we're going to be talking about three things, a trifecta, right? So why are those three things that you're going to be mentioning today so important for our professionals to know?
It's a great question, and I think that the personal training industry has evolved a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. It's no surprise to anybody that we've got programming and the personal training aspect of the industry pretty much dialed down. We know how to do it. We've got some great systems in place. Nutrition is now something that people are very strong in. They have a good understanding about it. They talk about the scope of practice. They know how to recommend people if they have additional needs. But the piece that's probably missing, and the third piece in that trifecta, is really around behavior change.
Right.
And what we're going to talk about today is how we can tie that in so that we really have a holistic approach to personal training.
Great, so putting all three of those pillars, as you'll talk about them today, so that we can support our clients.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Great, let's get started.
Okay. So thanks everybody for being here, and I want to say hi to everyone, and thanks for our international listeners and watchers, and also hi to all the team upstairs. I want to talk about the learning objectives, and as we get started, we're going to try to pin these learning objectives to the session and go through those during the rest of the session today. So what we're going to be talking about, as we just mentioned, is those three pillars, which is around health coaching, nutrition, behavior modification, and physical activity. And we'll be dipping into those a little bit, and we're going to spend a little bit more time today on the behavior change than the other two. Something really important for us to take away from this session is understanding how to use a behavior assessment tool to help determine an individual's readiness to change. That's going to be a critical piece to the success of our clients, understanding when they're ready to change and helping them understand when they're ready to change. Because if they're not willing to engage in a physical activity just yet, that's fine. Our goal is to help them find out when are they going to be ready to change. And then the last piece that we'll spend a bit of time on the back end of the session is talking about some assessments and what the role is of using basic assessments to help facilitate behavior change. Let's talk about setting the foundation and building from the ground up. In any situation, whether it's working with your clients, whether it's building a house, whether it's about setting a goal for yourself, the first piece of the conversation is really to understand what you need to do, what are the things you have to put in place to really build a solid foundation. If we get a solid foundation in this relationship that we're building with our clients, they'll be successful. If we set the foundation the appropriate way and we build up, not only will they know what they need to do, their expectations will be met, but we will know clearly what we need to do in terms of how we can help each other. Because we're going to talk about building a relationship. And the key to building a relationship is that there's going to be balance, but we need to go about setting that foundation. We'll keep coming back to this critical piece about setting the foundation as we go through the session today. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about those specific clients. What might help some of you today is to think about a client you're perhaps struggling with right now. You have maybe a client who's not able to meet some goals for some specific reason, or maybe it's a general reason you haven't yet uncovered. And let's keep that person in the back of your mind, so as you go through the session, we can talk about that a little bit more and you can pull out some of that information. Now, one of the pieces I want to make sure we do early on is set some boundaries around some definitions. And the first one I'm going to talk about is defining health. If I asked you to define health, some of you might go, well, to me a definition of health is perhaps the absence of illness or injury. And while that is a definition of health that we use, I think the World Health Organization here has gone with the broader kind of analogy or definition, and they took about health being a positive concept emphasizing social and personal resources, as well as physical capacities. So it kind of builds in that inherent in the absence of illness and injury, but it makes it a little bit broader. Underneath health is also wellness. And we want to be able to talk about a definition of wellness or a couple of definitions of wellness to help provide a coherent foundation and a common foundation when we're talking with our clients. We're going to talk about 6 different components of wellness, and we know there's a lot of different definitions out there, and there's a lot of different dimensions of wellness. We're going to cover off these 6, 4 of them which are more critical, and the first 2 less critical. But let's just cover those off so we've got that common grounding for the rest of the session this morning. So the first one is around social wellness. Social wellness is how people interact in society, whether it's in a local community, whether it's in an office place, or whether it's in a broader sense. But it's around interaction with others. Not something that we will necessarily spend a lot of time on with our clients, but it could come into some of their preferences and maybe some of their viewpoints when they talk about what others think about them. Environmental wellness, very topical today in that going green and being environmentally conscious, lowering our footprint type of conversation. But definitely something that we may include if our clients are interested in focusing on that area of their wellness. Most of our clients come to us, they're going to ask about physical wellness, right? It's the physicality, it's the physical activity, it's perhaps changing, going from being sedentary or less active to more active. And that's something a lot of people are going to ask about, and it's probably one of the more common things that you're going to want to help them on. But it isn't necessarily something that every client that comes to you is going to be seeking assistance for. Certainly when you think about a coaching model, many people are interested in changing other habits, but physical could be one of those. Spiritual wellness is around our beliefs and our value system, and that one's a critical one. Because when we want to change somebody's habits, we're going to have to understand a little bit about their beliefs and their values. If I was to have a conversation with you about something that was controversial because we had a disagreement, it could well be that we have a different value set or a different belief set. And therefore, we're going to have a difference of opinion. And if you want to change somebody's behavior, one of the things we want to understand is what are those fundamental values they have, or what are those beliefs. If we can start to substitute a different belief or a value set, it's a lot easier to make that change. The next one is around emotional wellness. And emotional wellness deals with the ability for us as individuals to perhaps turn inwards, more of an introspective model, and think about our own emotions, perhaps our trigger points, how we react to certain things, what are some of the things that we're vulnerable to. And it's really having that inner dialogue with ourselves and opening ourselves up. So something that we're going to be talking about a little bit more. And the last one is around that intellectual wellness. The ability perhaps or the desire to want to change or improve a skill set. Maybe we want to improve our knowledge in a specific area or start building our knowledge in a specific area. When we talk about those wellness definitions, physical, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual being the important ones, we're already starting to see those little pieces themselves are critical when we're going to have a conversation with somebody about making a change and starting a new habit. So let's keep those in the back of our minds, and we'll go back to those as we go through the day. Have a look at the screen here. We've got a definition of coaching. It's quite a large or broad definition. We're going to key in on a couple things. The first thing is that health and wellness coaches partner with their clients. So that word partner, I think, is key. We'll keep coming back to that. If I say we're partners in something, it has a very different context than if it's you versus me or us and them type of environment. So keep partner in the back of your mind. And then we highlighted a couple of key things here, the first one being self-directed. These are clients who are self-directed. That's a very different thought process than perhaps a traditional model that we'll discuss versus the health coaching model. Next one is aligned with their values. This is about a partnership that's self-directed, aligned with their values. For many of us growing up in the fitness industry, perhaps 10, 15 years ago, it was about us coming up with an idea and giving our values to somebody else. But that's not what the coaching is about. It's about aligning something with their values, but it's about that individual doing that. And then we talk about a belief in their capacity. It's their clients or their belief in their capacity to change. And that's their belief. And we're going to help them with that. We're going to help unpack that and help support them in their belief. And then the last part of this definition really deals with us as a personal trainer being respectful and non-judgmental in the way in which we fulfill that relationship. So in your world, if you're working with somebody or you've got a friend or a colleague, think about how different that relationship is if they're not a partner. Think about how different that relationship is if they're perhaps not as respectful and they're more judgmental. I think when we think about our personal lives, it's very easy to change those hats, and that's where you get yourselves in trouble going, well, maybe I wasn't as respectful there. Perhaps I was judging a little bit. So it's very easy to see that. Those biases can come out when we're working with clients subconsciously. And so part of what we're going to go through today is helping you as a personal trainer understand where those vulnerable spots could be so that you're conscious of that and you can make those active changes. Those are our definitions. If we take those definitions together, we've already started to talk about the client a lot more. It's not about us as the personal trainer, it's about the client. And we'll start to think about, hold on a second, if this is the client, their beliefs, being non-judgmental, being respectful, that's turning it into more of a client-centered approach. And if we use these images on the screen as a couple of examples, which one of those resonates more with you from a client-centered approach? Well, it's the one with the lady in the gym where her personal trainer is along the side of her. It looks like it's a nice, easygoing conversation. There's a supportive environment there. I'm not saying the other image is a bad image. I'm saying that that's more of a directive and confrontational image, which is okay in certain environments. If you think about an early morning workout session where you need to be motivated and pushed hard, that might be a great environment for a lot of people. And that's perfectly okay. But here's the question I'm going to ask you. How many of your clients who are coming in and sitting down with you for the first time, who've never exercised before, want that aggressive or in-your-face kind of environment? Think about the typical client, not the successful one, the typical client that sits down in front of you and says, I'm feeling bad, I have low confidence, I need to make a healthy decision, or I need to make a decision that's going to change my life for the better. Those people need to be more of in a supportive environment. So that client-centered approach is really critical to starting to build that foundation. Let's talk about how we change our approach. That's one of the keys for us, is we spoke about the foundation at the beginning of this session, but something we have to understand, and also how our clients need to understand that we're going to change the foundation as well. We're going to change the approach with them. If our client sits down in front of us expecting us to be more of a directive personal trainer and expecting us to do things a certain way, and we come at it from a different angle, that can be very offsetting for them. And part of the key to building a relationship in an environment that's trusting is to let them know this is what the relationship's going to look like. This is how we're going to move forward. And so we have to change our approach. We also have to change their approach. I want us this morning to think about a paradigm shift in our heads. We've got 3 circles there, the 3 pillars that we'll unpack and dig into a little bit more. The first one is nutrition, which we said we're pretty good at that, right? We have a good understanding of it. We've got lots of resources. The second one is that physical activity. And then we've got the third one, which is the behavior change. And if we're to take all of those pillars, all those different approaches and bring them together, sitting in the middle is a sweet spot. And when we're blending all of that information, we've got our client at the center of all of that, that's the paradigm shift. And it's a paradigm shift in the sense that we're now turning everything around and our client is at the center of everything we do. A little bit different perhaps from some of the models we've traditionally used, but let's dig into that a little bit more so we can see how that difference has an impact on the client. So this first slide I really like. It's around a comparison between a traditional care model and a health coaching model. And if you look at that slide and look at the traditional care model, it's almost as if you could read through that a health professional is seen as the expert, and they tell the clients what to do. And it's a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, and they focus perhaps on extrinsic factors. It really is just the model, the blueprint, if you will, for that traditional care model. Now, we're not saying everybody follows this model. I think if you to think about a traditional care model, perhaps an environment you've been in the past, was that how it was presented to you? I can think of an experience when I went to the doctor's office where I wasn't the expert in myself. And it really felt like I was just a number coming through the door, and I was given a quick 3 or 4 minutes of time, and then off I went. And that's quite different from the approach on the other side of the screen, which is where the client's an expert in their life. Circle that, keep that in your head. The client's an expert in life, because we're going to come back to that again. In that model, we ask permission to move forward. We ask, with permission, could we make a suggestion? But we're going to help them individually tailor a solution to their goals. And that's more going to an intrinsic motivator. We're going to come from an intrinsic motivator. And then we're going to collaborate with them. And then something I think is important there is we'll address those barriers to change. Rather than perhaps ignoring that they're not going to change or it's hard to change, let's address that. Let's put it out there early on and have that conversation. And then we can help lower resistance to change. Because you can't lower one's resistance to change if we don't have the discussion about that change. So in the healthcare model, we want to think about, let's move ourselves, let's have that paradigm shift and change our philosophy more to that health coaching model. So as an individual, that's quite different. If we look at some of the keywords on this slide, the first one to pull out is a directive versus a collaborative. Straight away, if I say directive, you have a clear understanding. Yep, I'm in control. I say what goes and people listen to me. Collaborative means I need to take a step back. I need to bring along my client by my side and have a discussion with them. And rather than forming the action plan, I'm going to empower my client to form their own action plan. Rather than me giving them all the answers, which, by the way, is something they're going to ask. You tell me, what should I do? My response is, well, what would you do? You know, we have to turn that around a little bit more because we want to empower them to form their own action plan. And of course, we're going to be there to help them, but it's their action plan. And if we can guide them as opposed to lead them or push them, we know they'll be successful. So that paradigm shift is something I want us to think about. As you're sitting there now thinking about this, is it easy to make that shift? And a lot of times we go, yeah, you know what, Anthony, that is pretty easy to do. But I'm going to challenge you. It's easy to say it now. I'm going to challenge you to do it when you're working with your clients, because that's when it's most important. To hold up, to step back and go, hold on a second, am I being too directive? Am I leading them versus directing them? So keep that in the back of your minds. Now what I'd like you to do is just take a second and think about somebody in your life who is a great coach, a great leader, just a great person in general. Have a think about some of the attributes that that individual has. Have a think about the interactions that you have with that person. Is that person passionate? Are they compassionate? Do they lead by example? Are they great listeners? Do they have discipline? And there's a whole host of other attributes they could have. But could you imagine if when you went to see your mentor, they didn't have some of these attributes? It's going to have an impact on your ability to move forward in your goals. So our mandate, our request to ourselves is, how do we become more passionate? How do we lead by example? How do we change our own habits so we can be a great coach, a great leader, a great person? I want you to think about that a little bit more as we go through today. What are some of the things that you could do differently with that client that you've identified to make you a better leader, a better coach? As we get further into our session, I want us to consider 4 things. What are some of the tools of the trade? And like any tool, we can have a hammer, we can have a big blow, we can have something precise to make a small hole in something. But the benefit of having these tools is we can use them, we can put them away, we can get them back out. And our toolbox is going to be a lot bigger at the end of this session. But I want us to consider 4 areas. It's not the only 4, but it's 4 really important areas. The first one is around goals and goal setting. We're all very familiar with setting goals. If we wanted to go on vacation, the first thing we would do is say, well, where is it we want to go, or when do we want to go? So they're quite large. And then as we decide, well, I want to go on holiday at this time and this place, then we have to back up a little bit and say, well, if I was going to do that, when would I start planning that? And then you would actually have the holiday booked. When it gets closer to your holiday, you say, now I need to pack my suitcase and pack my bags. You start thinking about the individual things that you would put in the bags. If you take that same analogy, thinking about when you're working with your client, they have this large goal. They've come up with this large goal that's very far down the road, or it's closer. Now we have to back up and working alongside them, not pushing them, but working alongside them, how will they get to that goal? And that piece about how they get there is a little bit different than perhaps the model we might have employed in the past, which is, here's how I would recommend you get to that goal. Goal setting is very, very powerful. And in fact, we think about a ship, and people talk about a rudderless ship. If you don't know the direction you're going in, how would you know if you've gone wrong? And that's true. But I would challenge us to really focus on some of those intermediary goals, waypoints, if you will, so that we can get to that big goal. Because often the big goal is the easy one to articulate, but it's the smaller ones as you get closer in and as are more daily that are more challenging. Our next one is about readiness to change. And I think readiness to change is something that we will often say, hey, I can change, I can make a difference, but when we actually dial it back, it's quite challenging. So let me ask you right now, think of something, a habit that you recently tried to change. Was it easy to do it, or was it hard to do it? Were you successful or unsuccessful? And as you think about that habit, what about one habit that you changed versus a habit that you perhaps didn't change? You felt very differently when you were successful than when you were unsuccessful. So why are we sometimes successful in one area and unsuccessful in another area? Now we translate that into when we're working with our clients, are they actually ready to change, or are they just saying they are? Think of the client that comes in and says, yep, I'm ready to work out today, and perhaps they're not really that ready to work out. Our goal is to assess whether in fact they are ready to change and then help them move forward for that. We'll actually talk about that assessment in a second. And the last one we're going to talk about, the third one we're going to talk about is around communication. What's nice about communication is we all do it. We always communicate all day long. However, what's interesting about communication is, are we actually good at it? We do a lot of things subconsciously, and we do a lot of things consciously. So the key around communication is understanding how to communicate in the right environment and what the message is. Because often it's not what we say, it's how we say it. And for those of you who've got in trouble at home with your parents or your partner, your spouse, they might have said, it wasn't what you said, it was how you said it. And that's the key to communication. But there's also our physical communication. There's also our innate or subconscious feelings about somebody that can be communicated without us knowing. So part of communication is really being introspective and going, am I really open to listening to what this person said or listening to what this person's story is? And that leads into our last tool that's a critical tool, is active listening. Think about that situation. You've been out somewhere and you're talking to a friend, perhaps you haven't seen this person for a long time, or you've just met this person for the first time, and it's super interesting. You're having this dialogue, it's going back and forth, and all you're focused on is this person. You're looking into their eyes, and you're just loving the story, they're telling you something, and time flies, and you're unaware of everything around you. You're inside that bubble, and you're 110% focused on that individual. That's a really enjoyable experience. It's a very motivating and powerful experience for the person talking to you as well, because you feed off each other. Now, how different is that experience where they're actively listening to you and you're actively listening to them back and forth, than when you're talking to somebody and they're perhaps on their phone, texting at the same time, or they're just listening and you can tell they're listening after another conversation. We can inherently tell those things. So active listening is in fact a skill. And for us to be more accomplished at it, we need to be better at it. How many of you right now are 100% focused on what I'm saying as opposed to multitasking? I'll bet a considerable amount of money now, after bringing your attention to it, some of you put your phones down and you've refocused back in. So now you're actively listening. And that's the key, is being able to refocus ourselves, which is a skill. So once we've spoken about those different tools, we can think about, okay, where do we go now? Well, the first step is about building a successful relationship. I've never heard of a successful relationship that wasn't built on good communication. Because that first time you met somebody and you were having that conversation, you were actively listening to them, you were starting to build trust. You were starting to build rapport. When you're working with your clients, we can kind of put that into a more formal setting where perhaps we're in the investigation stage of the conversation or the journey. And we're going to build rapport, the way in which we ask questions, how we're interacting with them, the style in which we work. But that's also the same for when we're in the planning phase and we're in the action phase. It doesn't matter where you are in the phase of building a relationship, you're still going to continue to build rapport. It isn't a tick the box. With your friends and your colleagues in your workplace, you're always building rapport with them. And over years, it just becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. But when we build rapport with our clients, we might only have a split second or 10 seconds or 30 minutes to create that initial impression. Therefore, we want to be thinking about how do we build rapport by working with that person in the right environment. And as we dig a little bit deeper into this, we're going to talk about that a bit more. But I think one of the ones we spoke about as a great leader was that person who was a great listener but had humility. And some of those things are really important to think about. Having humility allows you to be open to someone else's views and perspectives and really listen to what they're saying. So we've been thinking about building rapport, and we've been thinking about the goal setting. But really, what is the primary reason we're doing all this? Well, it's about success. It's about building success and providing opportunities for our clients to be successful. And if your client is successful, guess what? We'll be successful. But it doesn't always work the other way. Us being successful doesn't necessarily mean to say our client's successful, because we're not client-centered. So we want to think about our success being hinged on their success. It's the accomplishment of an aim or a purpose. And that's very singular. But it can be broad or it can be rather narrow. We want to think about that success as something that's a paramount piece for our clients. And perhaps in those early sessions with our clients, we might ask them, hey, what does success look for you in this environment? You'd said you want to change the habit. If we were to change the habit, how would you view that as being successful? That allows them to look into the future a little bit more and go, wow, I had never really considered it that way. So think about that success as something that's very powerful. Let's think about those three pillars, the power of three, the trifecta. Let's break those down a little bit more. I'm going to spend the next part of the session talking about those. The first one I'm going to talk about is nutrition. We're actually going to spend a short amount of time on nutrition because I think we have that dialed in pretty well. But I want us to have some common context for nutrition when we're thinking about that trifecta approach. Remember, we've got three areas we're going to focus on. One of them that we want to be strong in is around nutrition. And the nutrition that we're going to be working as a personal trainer is really about the guidelines and the advice and the support. This isn't about prescription. This isn't about giving diets. We've got other experts that we can give that information, get that information from, or help our clients go to. Our focus is really focusing on the basics of nutrition, the basics of the macronutrients. What are the essentials in digestion and absorption? How does hydration work? It's some of the underlying things that lead to some of the issues that they might be experiencing. But we're not going to diagnose those. All we're going to do is give our clients some advice. So for example, here are the dietary guidelines, and here's an example of what a higher protein snack might look like, and help our clients educate themselves on what they can have and when they might want to have some of those things. So when it comes to things like nutrition concepts, there are people out there who mightn't understand that there are foods that are not highly processed. And that may be challenging for us to understand, but again, we have to put ourselves into their world and look at their perspective through their lens. If you live in an inner city, in a very built-up inner city, your grocery shopping experience might be constricted or defined by what you see in the local convenience store that's the size of this room that's very small, versus somebody who lives in a country who's might be going to a farmer's shop, versus somebody who can go to a giant mega store. Your perspectives and your experiences shape your visions. So when it comes to things like grocery shopping as an example, how do we help people understand what better choices might be? How do we help people with understanding what a recipe or a ingredients list might work? What might be the better choice for them there? So we want to be able to give them that information. What about the client that says, hey, I want to make a choice here. I want to go with the better food. I want to change my eating habits. Is that something your clients have asked about? It's probably a pretty common question. So helping them and supporting them with that, whether it's focusing on environmental changes and how to control eating, or that self-monitoring and self-regulating approach, self-management. These are not directive. These are tools and ways in which we can help strategize and give them a plan. Remember, they come up with the plan. We just help them. And obviously, we always talk about taking small steps. So our goal as the nutrition person, nutrition coach in this environment is to again help give them information. And if we need to get more information, we know where we can go and get it. So just a little bit on nutrition today. Now we're going to focus on the behavior change component. And this is where we're going to spend a chunk of time, because the behavior change piece is the piece that we said at the beginning that is really something that makes the differentiator for you as a personal trainer. So what is behavior change, and why is behavior change so complicated? So that's a big question, and isn't something we're going to be able to answer completely today, but I want to dig into a couple of things. Remember, when we talk about being a behavior change expert or a health coach, it's a long process. But as a personal trainer, we want to give you some of those skills so you can start to have an informed conversation. And if you want to delve more into it, whether it's through a new certification or one of our specialist programs, we've got that available for you. So understand that behavior is complicated. Why we do things is complicated, whether it's from a social perspective, whether it's from an individual perspective, whether it's our upbringing, whether it's the stress that's on our life and a current situation. But there are many reasons why people have a certain behavior, and there are many reasons why it's hard for us to change. So the first part is understanding and accepting that changing behavior is hard for everybody in different environments. Our motivations and our emotions have a huge impact on our ability to change. And we can see on a daily basis, think about how your motivations change and your emotions change on a daily basis, even an hourly basis. Think how different it was when you had a bad conversation on a phone versus a positive conversation. All of those things build up and add up. Something I'd like you to consider when you're working with your clients is you might be the only person this week that has given your client a reason to feel positive. You might be the only person this week who's given them a reason to think about something positive. And that's huge. We live in an environment that's incredibly stressful, and it's going to have an impact on a daily basis. So we think about that and understand that our motivations and our emotions fluctuate, and that's going to make that behavior change a little bit more challenging. We're impacted by our desires. We're impacted by our preferences, and we're impacted by stresses, and those impact our motivation. Those impact our emotion. Remember, emotional intelligence that we were talking about, or emotional wellness, is our desire to look inside ourselves. Our upbringing has a huge impact on this, but so does the environment around us. So on a daily basis, when we're working with our clients, we want to understand, where are they sitting today? On a scale of 1 to 10, how does this feel like you're going to be successful? I'm feeling like a 2 today versus a 5 today, or an 8 today. We can ask those questions of them. And as we talk about motivation and we talk about emotions, there are a couple of theories that we're just going to highlight briefly that we can use. And by the way, there's many, many theories out there, models that we can use. I just wanted to highlight 3 of them today. And the first one is the health belief model. And this model suggests that people's ideas and beliefs around illness, underlying beliefs around illness, have an impact on their ability to know whether or not they think they'll be successful in making a healthy behavior change. And essentially what we're doing in this environment is we're looking at the pros and cons. We're looking at a health threat versus a health behavior. And we're adding up, subconsciously adding up whether or not we should go in this direction or go in that direction. And if we understand that if we're always looking at the pros and cons about whether we should do something positively, then we're always going to have a reason why not. And so understanding someone's underlying belief around being more active, or stopping smoking, or going to bed more on a regular time, understanding people's beliefs behind that will help them figure out, which way do I want to come at this approach. And that ties into self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is one's belief that they'll be successful at something. It can be broad or it can be narrow. And when we're working with our clients, we have to understand, are we talking about self-efficacy in general, or are we talking about something specific? And we can use certain things such as mastery of experience to help build someone's self-efficacy. Imagine it like a dial that you can turn on and turn off. That's how self-efficacy can work. If we give a task to somebody and they're successful, their self-efficacy goes up a little bit. And we give them another task that they're successful, and their self-efficacy can go up a little bit. But if we give them something that's hard and they're feeling vulnerable, their self-efficacy might go down. So we want to give them experiences, and by the way, sitting across from you, talking to you, is an experience. You want to give them an experience where they walk away feeling successful. They walk away feeling optimistic. And so we can play with that self-efficacy and help them be more successful there. And then the last one we're going to talk about is the trans-theoretical model of change. I'm going to spend just a little bit more time talking about this because it's a really good behavioral assessment tool to understand where people are in that journey. Now, I'm not going to be able to give you the whole model and all of the different ways in which we can deploy this model or use this model. You could read a thick book on this and still be learning more. But I think it is a very powerful tool to pique your interest today and then go away and learn a little bit more about how people go through this change model or the stages of change when they're going from what we would consider pre-contemplation to doing something. If we look at the different stages, pre-contemplation is where somebody doesn't even know they need to make a change, or even if they know they need to make a change, they wouldn't know how to get started. And they may or may not be talking to you, but they may be thinking, well, exercise isn't for me, or being more active is not something that I could do because I wouldn't know what to do. That's a pretty common one. I know I have to be active, but I wouldn't know what to do, so they just don't even address the issue. And so they're in a pre-contemplative mode or pre-contemplation. They might see misinformation and believe that misinformation is the reality of the world because they have a narrow lens that they're looking at. But then they may move at some point into contemplation. And contemplation is where they go, okay, so I've seen this in misinformation. I think that I could be more successful. I'm interested in perhaps moving forward. And they're thinking about how do I make this habit change? You know, what do I need to do? And they're talking to you about that. This might be something where they're saying, in the next 6 months, as an example, I'm going to make a change. So the way that they interact with you and the questions that you need to ask of them are going to be a little bit different. But in both of these models, people can be very vulnerable and can be defensive. So we have to also be careful when we're talking to them that we don't push them back to those old ways. And as we talk about this model, there's not a time frame in which people go from A to B or from the beginning to the end. It can happen very quickly, and it can happen over a long period of time. You might wake up one day and you've moved from pre-contemplation to contemplation. What's more important for us is to understand the process that somebody's going through. When they get to preparation, they're at the point where they're saying, right, I'm ready to make this change. I went to the gym, I got some information, I went online, and I read about it. I spoke to somebody about it. And they're ready to make that next step. And this is where we can come and work with them more in a much more supportive role, because often in this environment, they're very overzealous, or they have very ambitious goals. This might be the example of the client who says, I'm going to start training. I want to work out today. I've never done this before. And you see them next week in the gym, and they're working out on the treadmill, and they're doing an hour a day for 5 days a week. So they've got this very ambitious goal, which probably won't be successful. So they've gone from doing nothing to a lot. And so we have to coach them and support them in an environment that allows them to back off and not feel like they've been unsuccessful. Then we talk about action, and the person is now regularly doing this activity, whether it's once, twice, 3 times a week, and perhaps it's in the first 6 months that they're going to be doing this activity. But now we're perhaps focusing more as an expert and giving them additional coaching. Maybe they're looking at different ways to be more active, or they're looking at different ways to enhance the habit that they've taken on board, this new habit that they're doing. But it's a gradual process. And then the last phase is maintenance. And as it says, and as it suggests, here they're in the habit, they're doing this new habit, and they're looking at ways to maintain it, or perhaps they want to readjust and move to a new goal. But as we go through this, we're going to ask questions and speak to our clients to understand where they are in this process. Something to keep in mind is you can always relapse. You could hear some information. You could have a negative experience. You could stop doing something and go all the way back to start. Just like in Monopoly, you go back to start if you roll the dice wrong. And it's the same with this environment. So we want to be careful and continue to support those individuals in those different stages. And as you dig deeper into the model, there are different ways using different techniques to engage with your clients. Okay, let's talk about physical activity. We've checked off the nutrition. We spent some time talking about behavior change. And I want to talk about physical activity, just a small amount of time here today, because I want to set some constraints around, I think, what we may want to do with physical activity. And I think there's a couple of important concepts I want us to understand when it comes to building and establishing trust through physical activity. We've been doing it through the behavior change. We've been doing it through nutrition. But I want to just introduce those of you who are not familiar with the ACE-IFT model on a high level what this model is. And we're really only going to focus on the top part of your screen at the moment because I want us to understand that we have a continuum. Everybody who does physical activity will start and finish at some place on this continuum, whether it's function, whether it's health, whether it's fitness or performance. We're all going to be on there. We might start on one and move to a different phase, or we might stay in one phase. A client might come to you who's already been working out for 6 months, a year, and they're focused on the fitness phase, or they're focused on the function phase. But what's important about this model is a couple things. One, it's dynamic. You can move up and down. If I was in the performance phase and I injured myself and had to sit out of activity for 6 months because I tore my Achilles, I may have to start back in function or health. The flip side of that is I might just come to you and say, all I'm interested in is feeling better about myself and I want to lower my blood pressure. So we're going to focus on just keeping you in the health phase. But what this allows us to do is start to build a little bit of rapport and build a bit of trust with our clients by allowing them to know where they sit, where their start points are, and where they're going to finish. And we can clearly see that when people fluctuate and move up and down through that model. And that helps build trust. But it also allows us a platform to help promote and build that behavior change. And one of the important things, we said there's a couple of important things that this model really allows the opportunity to do, and one of them is providing a positive experience. It's not something that's unfamiliar to them because we're talking to them about, is it function, is it health, is it fitness, is it performance? We want to allow them to know, there's no secrets here, right? We want them to know, here's where we're going to start, and here's where we're going to finish them, so they can see that that's going to be a positive experience. So we talked about starting. What's a great way to start a program? Ta-da, assessments. We can use assessments as a marker to see where people start, where they may be in a midpoint, and where they are at the end of a program, right? We can use them to measure progress. So my ask is that you use assessments more than just once. It's not unusual to see someone do an assessment at the beginning of the program, and then we just move away from those assessments. But think about that analogy we spoke about in that tool of goal setting. Remember we were talking about setting this long-term goal? But these midpoints could be assessments. These midpoints are going to help shape the direction that we're going. And if we're off track, by the way, the rudderless ship, if we're off track, those assessments help get us back on track. So we can use them at the beginning, we can use them in the middle, we can use them at the end. What's really, really critical about assessments is ensuring that we use the right assessment for the right individual. Why is that important? Well, it creates a positive experience and it helps them understand that not everything has to be high intensity, not everything has to be at the far end of the spectrum. We can use very low-level assessments. And many of our clients are going to be coming into us and saying, I've not been active for a long time. So our goal isn't about making it hard for them, it's about building their self-efficacy. And the way in which we might build their self-efficacy and give them a small success is to give them something basic. And what I like about the examples we're going to talk about just now is it gives us the opportunity to really work with the client, interact with them, and start to coach them through some type of activity. It doesn't have to be a hard activity. So the first one we've got there is the Sharpen-Romberg test, which is a stability, mobility kind of activity. It's about measuring balance. It can be done just as you are. You don't need specialized equipment. You can do it in a room, you can do it in the gym, you can do it wherever you want. But as I'm doing it here, imagine you're working with me and I'm doing this test. You are now just talking me through the test. You're supporting me, you're coaching me, you're giving me cues and feedback, and we're learning, we're building on that relationship. So we think about that as a way to build on the relationship. Think about these assessments as a tool, absolutely to measure, but they're also a way for us to help interact with that person more of a physical sense. So the next one we have up there is a push-up. So I'm going to lay down and show you the push-up. The next time you work with your client doing a push-up in his assessment, have a think about the reason why we're doing this. Yes, we're doing it to assess their upper body endurance, but we're also using this as an opportunity to coach them through the movement, whether it's a full push-up or down on their knees. Now we have an opportunity to coach them. We can talk to them. We can build a bit of trust with them, and we can start to have a conversation, see how they work in an environment. Do they feel comfortable? Are they able to move proficiently in some of those other different areas that we're looking at? Are they interested in upper body strength? Are they interested in balance? We've based that on their goals. And then last ones we have up there, again, low-level assessments, are the walk and the Rockport 1.5 mile run. Don't worry, I'm not going to do those now. But these are easy assessments because we can do them inside on a treadmill. We can do them outside on a track. We don't need a lot of space. There's not a lot of specialized equipment. So we picked these 3 assessments just as examples to show part of the reason why we do assessments is to allow us the opportunity to start working with our clients and see how we connect. And then we can use them to build on. The goal of an assessment is not to see how hard we can push a client. It's about introducing them and think of it as building their self-efficacy. So I hope that makes sense for you there on the assessments. Let's just summarize here before we finish up. We'll bring on Jackie in a second and we'll have an opportunity to answer some questions at the end of the session. Couple key points to take away. First is about determining our clients' stages of change or where they are in that process. Are they ready to start exercising? Do we need to back up and talk to them a little bit more about how they need to get to that point? We certainly want to understand where they are in the process, because then when we come to conduct those assessments, we can conduct the most effective assessments, and that helps us tailor an individual tailored program for them that we spoke about at the beginning. And really important is to meet the client where they are. Meeting the client where they are is putting them in the center of this conversation, turning the shift on its head, that paradigm shift we spoke about, and making them the center of that triangle or the circles or wherever they are. They're always going to be in the center. So we meet them where they are. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch today. I'm going to bring Jackie back up here in a second, and hopefully we'll have a chance for some questions. And as she comes back over, we've got our resources up here, and there's a lot more information on our website. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony. Yes, we definitely have some resources. You can see those on your slide, just what you've used to create today's presentation if you're interested in learning more. So thank you very much for joining us today. If you do have questions for Anthony, we are going to be taking those questions right now. So go ahead and type those questions into your YouTube chat bar. We'll take those in just a few moments. In the meantime, you can take a look at your slide and see contact information for Anthony if you would like to touch base with him, follow him on Instagram and see what he's doing. I know you do fitness challenges, right?
Yes, yep.
Yep. So you can check those out and connect with him as well. If you were interested in today's presentation and this understanding how to improve your role as a personal trainer using health coaching and behavior change topics, then we have a lot of great information to share with you. So looking at your slide, we've got a few different courses that ACE offers if you're interested in learning more and delving a little bit deeper into this very important topic. Also, ACE now has the CEC Club. So if you'd like to receive unlimited continuing education for a low price, you can do so by joining our CEC Club, and more information can be found on that at acefitness.org. So let's go ahead and take a few questions. So a few things that are coming in, and Anthony, as I was listening to you and sort of watching the questions come in, we have what it seems like a really great group of people joining us today from all over the world, all over the country, and it seems like we have a lot of new people, new trainers, and also a lot of veterans who have been in the industry for 20 plus years. So when we're talking about these 3 pillars How is there a different way maybe that as a new personal trainer versus a veteran personal trainer that you might approach these three things or integrate them into your practice?
That's a really good question. I think we could probably break that into more of a general term. It isn't necessarily one specific pillar that you would approach differently. Certainly if you're a new personal trainer, whether it's nutrition, whether it's personal training or the behavior change, the goal there is setting yourself a goal, but the goal for you is to really understand that topic, whether it's nutrition, whether it's personal training, and whether it's behavior change. Once you understand the topic a little bit more, you can start to plan out how far into that do you get. For example, in the behavior change piece, maybe when you're working with your clients, rather than having an individual session with them, you're asking them some of the behavior change type things during their regular sessions. As opposed to a client who's more veteran trainer, who's been doing it for a long time, you may still have to learn the behavior change piece. So it's like everything else. Start small, learn one of the theories, maybe ask them a little bit about their habits and some of their goals, and start to weave in and blend in some of the questions that we talk about, the open-end questioning, the motivational interviewing that we have in our courses, but start to bleed those into the conversations. What I wouldn't recommend is starting and having a 40-minute session with somebody that's a one-on-one.
Right.
That's where it gets a little bit challenging.
Right. So understanding your role as a personal trainer, right, and kind of weaving those things in.
Weave the questions in during the regular sessions that you're having with your clients, or just keep the sessions shorter and then get into some more of the physical based stuff.
Great, great. So something else that has been popping up and a little bit of a theme as you are working with a client, you mentioned earlier that they may be coming from different places along that spectrum. They may be in pre-contemplation, or they may be in that action phase of the stages of change. So you mentioned sometimes it takes a little bit longer, or is a little bit more of a quicker process depending on the client. So how do you, as a personal trainer, sort of navigate this is maybe taking a little bit longer than we'd like.
Right.
How do you maintain some patience or maintain some empathy with those clients that's maybe just taking a little bit longer?
When we work with people and we're using that stage of change, why that's critical is we want to understand if they're not ready to be active, they're not ready to start working out, then we have to back out of that. And a lot of people say, well, how long will that take? Well, if someone's been sedentary for 30 years of their life, it's took 30 years for them to get to this point, or maybe they've stopped and started. So really part of that process, and there isn't a specific formula, but part of that process is to ask them, do you feel ready to change at this point? Are you ready to do this activity? And they're saying yes. Well, on a scale of 10, what might that feel like? And perhaps they say it's a 10. Okay, let's go and do something. Let's do some assessments, or let's go out and do a bit of activity, and then you can reassess. You're better off to start slowly and do a bit of activity and then step back and go, how did that feel? You know what, I just didn't feel that comfortable. Well, let's go back and reevaluate. You're better to do it that way than perhaps jump into a full-blown workout and then go, how did that feel? And they say that was a horrible experience. But there isn't a specific time. That's just through questioning and working with them and saying, are we ready to do something, and understanding that.
Right, and meeting, as you said, meeting the client where they are. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Always better to go easier than too much.
Right, and you mentioned the scale of 1 to 10.
Yes.
So that's something else that we've talked about in some of our other courses, is using this ruler for change. So if you ask them, and we've got just a little bit of time, so I feel like this can be helpful.
Yes.
If you ask them, how do you feel about this change on a scale of 1 to 10, and they say, meh, so, I'm a 5 or a 6, asking them if they are, why aren't you a 4?
Yeah.
What does that do?
So it's a great technique. It's a positive psychology technique, is asking them, you said a 6, why not a 4 or a 3? So we're getting the person to think about the reasons why they see it as a higher goal versus a lower goal, and we're changing the thought process there.
Right.
Typically we would say, you're a 6, why aren't you an 8? Well, that puts them in a defensive mode of having to justify a little bit. And remember, we speak about people early on in that change can get defensive very easily, and they feel like they're being judged. Remember, the definition of a coach is non-judgmental. So asking it the other way around is a really easy technique. And then we're going to say the why question. Why do you feel it's this, not that? Tell me more about that. What would it take then to get you a little bit higher up? And they can have that conversation. And then they start the dialogue in their head going, hey, you know what? Yeah, I am doing better. I feel a little bit more successful. Dialing up the self-efficacy.
Right, that's that self-efficacy and that health belief model kind of all coming together.
Yeah.
Great, great. So this is perfect segue. Like we said, that we've got a lot more information to dive in a little bit more into those types of tools that you can use with your clients. So if you would like to receive CECs, continuing education credits, for today's presentation or receive any other courses through ACE, you can do so by following the video on your slide. And today's course, once again, will be presented and available for you to purchase. Once you purchase and pass the associated quiz, you'll receive 0.1 continuing education credits within your My ACE account. So next month, we are also having another live webinar, and we're going to be talking with PhD Diane McCaughey. She's one of our great master
Diane
trainers.
Well.
Yes, the famous Diane McCaughey. She's going to be coming in and talking to us about working with the active aging population and how to reduce cognitive decline in that group. So great presentation from Diane coming next month. And just a quick announcement, as I know that we have Idea World coming up next week. So Anthony, you're going to be at Idea World, correct? I think presenting again,
Got 2 presentations, one on Saturday and one on Sunday, one on functional training and programming, and one on a similar topic to this that we've just spoken about.
Great, yeah, so if you are attending Idea World and would like to join Anthony for a little bit more information, we also have the ACE Mover Academy, which those presentations are a part of, and you can stop by the ACE booth, that's 1041, and we will see you at the ACE booth and all over Idea World next week.
Look forward to seeing you there.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get people moving.